So welcome. This is the Natural Pain Relief is Possible webinar, and I am Joanna, your host. So what I wanted to actually go over today is how inflammation can be the cause of your pain, how food can be your medicine or increase your or decrease your inflammation, and then how emotional stress plays into pain. So I am Joanna Hadaroska. I'm a nutrition coach. And I call myself a holistic nutrition coach because I work on really the whole body. And it's not just the physical body. The body's not just made of parts. It is looking at where is the root cause of the issue and what do we need to rebalance and bring back to balance, including the emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects in addition to the physical. So the body is always looking for that place of homeostasis. And nutrition is just one of the bases of it, but those other things come into play as well. So a little bit about me. 21 years ago, I got diagnosed with adrenal exhaustion. And about 5 months before that, I had just finished my first Ironman triathlon. So some of you might know what that is, but it's a long racing day. A little bike, a little swim before that, and a little run afterwards. And, I was able to do that. It was under 12 hours. And then 6 months later, I'm walking to the mailbox and back, and I need to take a nap. So I went from, little Miss Bundle of energy to sleeping 11 hours, not being able to think straight, not be able to concentrate, not be able to remember anything short-term or long-term, start projects and never finish them because I just didn't have the mental capacity to do it. So in that process of the adrenal exhaustion and then later my degenerating hip, I discovered that the body can heal given the right tools. And one of those tools is nutrition, how you fuel the body. But I also had to figure out, well, okay, if I'm a competitive athlete, I need to get competitive with my recovery process too. And part of that was learning, well, how did I get here? And that's what I do when I'm working with clients. I help you understand, okay, well, how do we get here? Now we have to peel those layers off so that we can find what the causes are and get the body back to regenerating itself. So through my adrenal exhaustion and that hip issue, that's when I learned that the body is affected by the foods that you eat. The food can either make your pain worse or your health condition worse, or it can make it better. So, and then I had to really find out how stress was more than just a physical thing. And I needed to learn how to manage my stress in a different way. So that's where several years later, I created my business, Nutrition in Motion, to help others to amplify their health and help them on their health journey so that they would not feel like they were alone. And we can help the body to ignite those, the natural healing process. So what I want to talk about today is inflammation. And inflammation is usually the cause of most health issues, including pain, especially chronic pain. And by definition, inflammation is a local response to cellular injury. So if you think about, you stub your toe, or Gina, you cut your finger, the body goes into an inflammation mode to protect itself from foreign contaminants, but it also speeds up the healing process. Inflammation is part of the healing process. It basically triggers a immune response. And typically you're accustomed to, you stub your toe, it swells, it hurts, it throbs. A couple days later, it turns black and blue. You ice it, you reduce the swelling, and the body will heal itself. So no matter what we're exposed to, the body will heal itself. The challenge is when that inflammation becomes chronic and that cycle doesn't stop. And another part of the definition of inflammation is Inflammation is the body's natural response to protect itself against harm, such as infections, injuries, and toxins in an attempt to heal itself. So we'll get into a little bit more of that later in the presentation in terms of how food can be one of the triggers to keep inflammation, to keep that inflammation cycle on instead of allowing it to turn off, and how we can implement foods to help to lower the inflammation so that the inflammatory response goes to its normal stage. So some of the causes of inflammation, injury is an obvious one, and a lot of times surgery is another one, because that's been a outside something. You've been cut, you've been repaired, you've been rebuilt. The body has an immune response so that it can heal. You might have heard of leaky gut, which is inflammation in the intestinal tract, and that can actually produce all sorts of other symptoms. Your food can also be a trigger. Stress is also a cause of inflammation, because it actually creates imbalances in parts of the body, which are trying to keep your body in homeostasis, but the stress is actually shutting down some of the vital processes. You might also notice that after you do exercise, either a new kind of exercise or interval training or something with high intensity, you might feel sore the next day. That's actually inflammation, but that's the good kind. It's when it's an injury and it's painful to even move, that could be a bad thing. Trauma is obviously a cause of inflammation, as well as dental work or infection. Even getting the flu, that's your body's response to a foreign invader, which is the flu. If you ate a poisonous mushroom, that would be your body's going into an inflammatory response as well. So here's just a little graphic. I'm not going to go into all the details, but in the normal inflammatory process, you get this sharp, acute range of pain and inflammation. That's where you get the inflammatory cytokines. That's where you get the immune system response, and it's typically local to the area that's been invaded or hurt. The next step is it goes into this resolution phase. So depending on what you're being exposed to, you get the repair going, and then as the body repairs, there's the dead cells that the body tries to eliminate, and that's where you typically get the bruising. That's a sign of the repair process, and then the body starts to flush that out, and then the body returns to its normal function. So depending on how bad the infection is, or the pain point that you incurred, it could take a few days or it could take a few weeks. But normally that's the cycle, and it's supposed to turn off. The problem is when we get into the no resolution, which becomes that chronic inflammation. So then you're in this heightened state of inflammation, and that is the challenge. This is where that chronic pain comes in. The chronic inflammation creates more inflammatory cytokines. It actually worsens your symptoms and can just impede the body's ability to heal. Make sense?
Yeah.
Oops, went the wrong way. So these are some of the common signs of inflammation. Obviously, pain is a sign of inflammation. There's good pain and there's bad pain, and we're referring here to bad pain, the one that's beyond uncomfortable. Like when you overexert yourself or you do some new activities, that to me, I call that it's pain, but it's the good pain. I actually enjoy having my muscles ache after a good workout. That I don't mind. But if it's still going to be aching 3 months later after I did that exercise, then we have chronic inflammation, and that's a problem. So any kind of body pain, it could be a headache, it could be joint pain, muscle pain, stomach pain, anywhere where swelling just isn't resolving itself. People that are overweight and have diabetes, that's also triggers an inflammatory response. GI distress, which could include constipation, diarrhea, stomach pain. It could also be other digestive issues, food sensitivities, including allergies and asthma. Those are all inflammatory responses. And then skin issues is a big one too, that most people don't realize that it is a sign of inflammation. Eczema, psoriasis, acne, rashes, dandruff. Cardiovascular disease, most people don't realize that that is also a sign of inflammation. It's not the cholesterol necessarily, as most people have been taught to believe. It's actually inflammation, which is causing plaque to build up and plaque to break off, because the body's actually having an inflammatory response to the excess plaque in the arteries. And then, oops, now I'm going backwards, right? I'm speeding up. Depression and anxiety are also related with inflammation, as well as slow healing wounds. Medicine can be your, food can be your medicine, or food can be your poison. This is just a graphic of, some of the things that people eat. I'm not saying that you have to be on one side or the other, but typically, more fruits and vegetables, more real food are going to be more beneficial for the body. And it was through, my hip replacement process that's when I actually really realized that food can make inflammation worse, or food can improve it. And that's where I started using nutrition response testing. And I identified foods that were inflammatory. And then as I was taking them out one by one, my pain just kept subsiding. And I remember being at a conference one weekend where I was getting a certification, and they tested me, and they identified sugar and brown rice. And at the time, I'm like, I'm not eating sugar and brown rice. But I remember that night trying to do yoga to force myself to be a little bit more limber, but it was so painful. And I woke up also that in the middle of the night at the 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, had to take 2 to 4 more Advil and go back to bed. So I know what pain feels like. And when I finally realized that I was actually eating at this conference, I had brought some powdered shakes with me, and the powdered shake had sugar and it had the brown rice protein in it. I took that out, and within the next day when I got home, I slept through the night, didn't wake up with any pain in the middle of the night, and I didn't have my hip hurting. So it was clearly evident that the foods that I was eating that I didn't know were inflammatory were causing my pain to be a lot worse. And as soon as I was able to remove it and find alternatives, then the pain subsided, and I was able to sleep through the night, and I got my energy back. I literally slept 1 hour less from that point forward, because I eliminated the inflammatory foods. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
So I gave most of you, I gave you a chart to fill out of food logs, and I don't know if you did or not.
I did.
Okay. Because that was part of your homework to get ready for the class today. So I'm just going to go over some of the 5 most inflammatory foods that I have found to be the present for most of my clients. Sugar is inflammatory. And it doesn't matter if it's organic sugar, it doesn't matter if it's processed sugar. Sugar is sugar, and sugar is almost like cocaine, especially for the brain, which is why it's so addictive. So a lot of times the foods that trigger constantly wanting to eat it, that may be actually a food that you might be sensitive to. So sugar is one of the most inflammatory foods. Wheat is often the problem. And one thing about wheat is the wheat in the US is genetically modified, and it's genetically modified in the laboratory. So because it's been genetically modified so many times in the laboratory, not only has the gluten increased exponentially, but now it's basically considered a foreign substance to your body and your intestinal tract. So that's where the inflammatory response comes from the wheat, because now it's this foreign thing. If it were genetically modified by the wind outside and just by natural farming principles, then your body would adapt to it and it wouldn't be quite so foreign and it wouldn't have quite as large of an inflammatory response. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that goes the same with any genetically modified foods.
What about organic?
Organic, the challenge with organic is that there's no guarantee that it's also not been genetically modified. There's an assumption that it's not genetically modified, but there's nothing with the organic practice that says that it has to be non-genetically modified foods.
I thought in the US, okay, I thought it was. I thought if it was certified organic, that means GMO, non-GMO.
Non-GMO.
I thought that. I could be mistaken, yeah.
I think, don't they have to specify that it's non-GMO in order to say it's non-GMO?
They still have to specify that it's non-GMO. So organic, you know, it's the assumption that organic is typically not genetically modified, but it's not, just because it's labeled organic doesn't necessarily mean that it is, or that it's not GMO.
And my thing is, Joanna, I would actually see if you, like, if they state like where it was actually grown, so you can track like everything that's going on around, you know, not only, you know, that things are, you know, that are not genetically modified, but, you know, that it's, you know, not being grown, say, like 5 miles from the Limerick power plant where, you know.
Right. Right. And that is not on labels, unfortunately. You know, and even if you were to call the company, they may or may not give you that information, you know, and the challenge is the food labeling really isn't honest food labeling. So you really have to do your extra research. But in general, you know, food is something that, whether it's organic or not organic, the organic is definitely going to be better than non-organic. But a lot of times you do the best you can. If you can't afford the organic, the other ones aren't going to you're going to get more benefits than you are negatives from it.
Yeah, sometimes organic just means it doesn't have the pesticides and stuff on it.
Right.
So you gotta be really careful.
Right. And organic, the way that organic is supposed to be, especially with grains and with vegetables and potatoes and things like that, is that they're supposed to rotate the soil so that every year you come back to the same farm, their peppers are in a different place. Their strawberries, well, strawberries typically stay in the same place. They don't uproot those and replant them again. But they're most of the vegetables, the green beans are going to be someplace else. They're all going to be in different parts of the farm, so that they can rotate the crop and rotate the nutrients, because each vegetable utilizes different nutrients from the soil in order to grow and to get the nutrients into the vegetable. So in organic farming, they're supposed to rotate the crops so that they're in different places, so that you will get the higher nutrient value in those organic foods. So with the artificial sugars and the artificial sweeteners, anything artificial is considered basically a foreign invader to your body. So it kind of goes, it's almost common sense, but it's really, you know, once you kind of start looking at it, you go, oh, okay, well, these are, again, artificial colors and artificial sweeteners are things made in a laboratory. It's not coming from nature. So my body may respond with an inflammatory response. So if you have your food logs completed, or I'm going to give you, you know, a minute or two to go ahead and jot down what you ate today. And then I want you to circle the foods that included sugar, wheat, hydrogenated fats, or any artificial sugars, sweeteners, or colors.
Can you expand on what hydrogenated fats are? Is that like is that all oils other than olive oil, or what is that?
No, so the hydrogenated fats are actually, this is another one that's made in the laboratory. So they added, they being the food manufacturers, will take a vegetable oil typically and add an extra hydrogen molecule to that fat. And what that does is creates a more shelf-stable fat, which is great if you're selling Twinkies or if you're selling processed foods, which you want to be able to have on the shelf a lot longer. So if you look at, let's say something like Doritos, you could have a bag of Doritos that are on the shelf for a year and it's not going to spoil because it has some of those hydrogenated fats in it. You pick up a bag of either organic or something like Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden brand has a 3-month or less expiration date because they use olive oil, and olive oil will go rancid sitting on the shelf at room temperature after 3 months. And I have actually bought them and not opened them right away, and I had to throw the bag away because the bag went rancid. So the hydrogenated fats, they may be preserving your food, but it's actually inflaming your body. So you're shortening your lifespan, even though the shelf life of the food has been increased. So the hydrogenated fats are only in processed foods. You cannot buy a bottle of hydrogenated fat. It's usually in cookies, chips, and baked goods. And if it even says partially hydrogenated fat, these are what are commonly referred to as the trans fats. So now even on the labels, if we're going back to the truth in labeling, on the label, it may say 0 trans fats, but in the ingredients, it may still list partially hydrogenated fat in it. So on one side, it says there's none, but in the ingredients, it lists it. And with the labeling laws, the way that they have it, they're allowed that even if you have 0.5 gram of hydrogenated fat in your food product, they can still list it as 0 trans fats. Crazy, isn't it? So the challenge is, let's just eat real food, try to make your own baked potatoes or, French fries or whatever it is that you're trying to do. When I'm working with my clients, that's what I do is I actually provide safe alternatives for the things that you're eating. What foods are you eating that have sugar in it? Okay, so what are the safe alternatives that we can implement so that it makes it easy for you to make that change? What are you eating that has wheat in it? If you're eating pizza, now there's cauliflower pizza crusts available. If you have a problem with brown rice like I do, that's actually more inflammatory for me than wheat. Then the gluten-free products are a no-no for me as well. Brown rice makes me tired and it makes everything hurt. But with like a pizza, there's also Banza pasta that makes a chickpea crust. And I actually tried that just because that's what I like to do. I try something once, and if I don't like it, then I tell my clients not to eat it because it tastes like cardboard. But that was actually pretty good. And I would buy it again. So when I'm working with my clients, that's what I try to do is identify the foods that you're commonly eating and then help you find the alternatives. And then we only change one food at a time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because trying to do all of them at once is really hard, and then when you know really what was causing the issue. Was it one of the 5 or was it all 5? So if we just do one at a time, then you make the connection between the food and the pain that you're experiencing or the symptom that you're experiencing. And once you make that connection, I'm not here to tell you don't ever eat it again, but you'll know that, okay, that food was worth it. It's my birthday. I'm going to have my chocolate cake because it's my birthday. And I'm going to be okay with the stiff joints and some of my extra pains because that chocolate cake was worth it. but I can't tell you it's worth it or not. I'm just giving you helping you make that connection between the food and the pain. So how many of you, when you were looking down your list of the foods that you were eating, circled more than 3 items that were on that inflammatory list? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just kind of giving you some awareness of, okay, maybe there's some room for improvement. So now we're going to go look at because the anti-inflammatory program that I do, it's not about, okay, we're just going to eliminate. We're actually going to also add anti-inflammatory foods, because it's a combination. We want to eliminate the anti-inflammatory ones, but we also want to include more anti-inflammatory foods that will lower the inflammation. And the 5 most common anti-inflammatory foods are all the cruciferous vegetables. So that would be your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, and kale. And that could be either cooked or raw, but most people do better with them cooked. And your digestive tract, especially if you're under more stress, will do better with cooked vegetables. Then there's the turmeric and ginger roots. And I can give you all sorts of ways to include that in the foods that you eat. I've got a shake that I make that has the turmeric root, and actually a lot of the ingredients that are on this page. So you can contact me and I can share that with you. But the turmeric and ginger roots are 2 really highly anti-inflammatory root vegetables. And you can include them in smoothies. You can include them in stir fries. You can also just cut them up and put some boiling water over them and steep them, and maybe put a peppercorn in there. And that would actually be something that could be beneficial, just to include, an ounce or 2 of that on a daily basis to help to lower the inflammation. The cold water fish is a really big one, but most people don't really like the cold water fish, unless you're like me, that grew up in a Polish family, and this is part of our heritage. But the herring, mackerel, sardines, and salmon are the essential fatty acid containing fish. And inside those essential fatty acids are DHA and EPA. And DHA is typically good for brain function, but the EPA, which is hexadexanoic acid, it's easier just to call it EPA, is the anti-inflammatory portion of the cold water fish. And you can only get it in the cold water fish. If you eat flax seeds and chia seeds, you're getting an omega-3 fatty acid, but your body has to actually convert that into the essential fatty acid. And sometimes it doesn't do that very well. So the fish that has the most of the EPA is the herring. It has, for every 3-ounce serving, it has 770 milligrams. And a therapeutic dose of essential fatty acids is 1,500 to over 1,500 milligrams per day. So, it's going to be really hard to eat herring, mackerel, sardines, and salmon every single day, especially if you have pain, which is why we resort to supplements oftentimes to aid in that part. But the herring has 770, mackerel has 470. I think sardines are very close to that. And then salmon only has 280 milligrams per serving. So just to give you an idea, that would be a lot of salmon to be eating every day in order to get 1,500 milligrams of a therapeutic dose of that essential fatty acid, EPA. So it's just something to consider to add a few times a week, but it may not be feasible to do it on a daily basis. Pineapple also has bromelain, which is an anti-inflammatory enzyme. But again, you don't want to eat too much of that, because then the acidity might disrupt your stomach. So I included that in that shake. And then bone broth, preferably the bone broth from chicken bones, because the collagen is actually good for healing the gut and balancing the intestinal tract, which helps to improve the immune response. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So now the question is, on that list of your food diary logs, now put a square around the items on this list that are actually on your page. Because ideally you want to have at least 2 to 3 servings of these, of the cruciferous vegetables every day. A serving of the turmeric and ginger root, and then the cold water fish maybe a few times a week. And depending on what kind of inflammatory condition you have, especially if it's arthritis and bone issues, then or tendon issues from an injury, the bone broth is really helpful, and also helpful for GI issues. So anybody have any questions on the food items?
Well, I can attest to the pineapple and what it does, because if I'm like having one of my really sore joint days and things like that, and I just get pineapple chunks, or now that my throat is bothering me more, so a can of pineapple juice, just a little small Dole one.
It does the trick?
Yeah, it like helps it subside a little bit easier. So it's something in it that I know that my body is missing. So when I do the pineapple juice, it does work. So
Excellent.
And the ginger.
Yeah. I mean, if you could put those two together, that would be really good. Kathy, you have a question. Oops. Kathy, you have a question. It says Kathy raised a hand.
Yes, I did. I had to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Can
That's
you hear
okay.
me?
Yes.
Going back a page, what with the artificial sweeteners, what do you feel about stevia?
Stevia, it depends. I mean, if you have stevia, straight up stevia, you should be fine. But most of the stevia that is in powdered form is stevia with dextrose. And dextrose is just another name for sugar. And that's actually a processed sugar, more processed than sugar.
How can I tell?
Look at the ingredients.
Okay.
Typically in the ingredients, if it just says stevia, then that's all it is. And that's what you really want to see. But if it's mixed with sugar, then, or with the dextrose, which is commonly what it's done, the same thing with like the monk fruit and some of those other non-sweetener replacements, those can often be mixed with the dextrose, in which case you're still adding sugar.
I find stevia mixed with erythritol or something.
Erythritol.
Yeah, and what is that a no-no as well?
It depends on the individual, but a lot of times, like the sugar alcohols, they don't typically cause inflammation, but they are more natural. But they are sugar alcohols, so the body processes them differently. And for a lot of people, they will cause more gas and bloating and digestive distress, and it can loosen the stools. So a lot of times in the low sugar, low calorie foods, they will put those non-sugar sweeteners in there, but it's not necessarily considered an artificial sweetener. So the artificial sugars and sweeteners are typically your NutraSweet, your Splenda, and your aspartame, and the asulfame-K, and those kinds of products. Does that make sense?
Can I ask you another question?
Yes.
So real quick, I'm just looking at the box of what I have, and it does have erythritol in it.
So the erythritol seems to be more tolerable than the others. I have not had issues, clients have not had issues with the erythritol. So if it's erythritol with the stevia, you should be okay.
Yeah.
It's not going to have an inflammatory response necessarily.
It says erythritol, stevia leaf extract, and natural flavors, but it doesn't indicate what the natural flavors are.
Yeah, natural flavors is always a questionable thing, but you know, how much are you using? If it's usually 600 times sweeter than sugar, a couple sprinkles aren't going to do a lot of damage.
Okay,
But just, if you were curious, take it off for 2 weeks and see if you notice any change in how you feel
Yeah,
and
because
then how you recover.
I'm still dealing with, I can't even say this live. It's too embarrassing. So I just have gastrointestinal issues. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, but that might be a trigger because sugar alcohols can be.
Mhm.
So that might be something that just to consider replacing.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I can help you with that.
Okay.
Okay.
I know, Joanna, now I have to watch with the sugar alcohols because for me they cause, and I don't know if it's related to the inflammation or for me I get migraines from them and they cause a lot of neurologic issues with me, but I don't know if that's also related to, the inflammation, in my blood vessels that it causes that kind of a response that it causes the migraines when, especially like maltitol and a lot of those sugar alcohols.
Yeah, the maltitol and the sorbitol are probably the two that are most inflammatory, if you want to call it inflammatory. But I think they do naturally occur in nature. But when they're processed, then your body doesn't respond. They may not respond to it the same. But I would just try to avoid it, I had a horrible problem with Carefree sugarless gum years ago. And I was a gum junkie and I could eat like a plenty pack in an afternoon. And it just gave me the worst GI distress and I didn't realize it. And it was just like as I would call it, the smelliest passing of gas too, that it was just, I almost passed out myself and I just couldn't help myself. And I finally was like, what am I eating? And it wasn't anything food wise, it was this, processed gum. And it was that sugar alcohol. So I try to warn people about that because it's usually in the processed foods. It's not in natural foods. So if you eat real food, you're going to be fine. If you eat a real potato, you should be fine. If you eat potato chips, you might have issues depending on what kind of fats that they used in the processing. Make sense?
Oh yeah.
So now you're kind of starting to make the connection between the food and the symptoms. Like,
yep.
It's a process to finally realize that, okay, I need to do something different, but it's got to be real food. That's what the body wants. All this processed stuff is for somebody else's profit. And unfortunately, it causes the body to be off balance. So now I'm going to move to the stress and its effect on inflammation. And as you know, stress makes everything worse. Stress will also cause imbalances in the immune system. It will basically deregulate the immune system, which is basically impeding that inflammatory process it'll impede the inflammatory process from finishing its course, and it'll just keep it on abnormally longer. So one of the big things with inflammation in terms of the stress is stress from emotional injuries from childhood. And I don't know if you're familiar with ACEs. They're called adverse childhood experiences. But those are the experiences that we had in childhood. We're in the process of learning how to act, how to be ourselves, how to act in society. And we can get criticized, we can get punished, and we can experience things and feel traumatized because that was our experience. It's not because somebody was mean to us. It was just that's how we process the situation. Those injuries, if they happen, either they can be traumatic as parents divorcing. It could be as traumatic as, my sister tripped me and I banged my head and now I have a welt on my head and it's a permanent scar. That could be viewed as your own personal injury, and it's an emotional injury as well. So these emotions actually get stored in the body. And different places, sometimes the pain that we have is actually our body asking us to process this emotion and this experience in a different way, so that we can release it and be able to kind of move on with our life. I had one client who came in with, really bad stomach pain, and we found that there was excessive heat in the liver, and after asking more questions about stress and things that were happening, there was a lot of emotion and resentment regarding their parents' divorce that precipitated the stomach pain starting, 3 or 4 years earlier. So until we were able to resolve some of those emotions related to that divorce, the stomach pain kind of persisted, even though we implemented the anti-inflammatory diet. So the stress can really be, it's an emotional thing, but it's causing mental stress, it's causing physical stress, and it can cause that inflammatory response and the pain. I had another client that had pain in the thumbs. And for them, pain in the thumbs, if you think about it, it's like you're holding on, you've got a grip on something. So they were gripping onto an issue, and it happened to be related to the family, not that they grew up in, but the family that they created. And it was an issue that they were holding onto that they didn't want to let go. And that's why the thumbs were hurting. So once we were able to release that, then they were able to get back to their activities. And I'm going to show you, I'll show you a picture a little bit later of that same client doing yoga, and she's actually holding herself up. So obviously they don't have pain in the hands anymore, so that they can get back to their yoga. And then I had a client called Joan, who has hip pain, and the constant criticism from childhood, that ended up being that emotional injury that just got stored in the hips. And the fear of being themselves and moving into the next path of their life. It just, the hip pain was a reflection of that fear of criticism being stored in the hips. So as they work through the fear of criticism and just saying, you know what, you can stand up for what you know to be true for you. Whatever those criticisms are, it doesn't matter. They're not about you. That's their fear for what you're going to do. You know what you want to do. And the hip pain started to dissipate once the fear of standing up for what they knew to be true for themselves became greater than the fear. Make sense?
Yeah.
So that's something just to kind of contemplate, is when you have some kind of pain, are there other emotions that are coming up? Like, what's the trigger that's coming up? It can be food related, but there may be other emotional issues that are surfacing, that the body's trying to get your attention through the pain to work through that emotional injury from childhood. Make sense? And so a lot of times the stress also contributes to sleep disturbances. Pain obviously will cause sleep disturbances, because if you wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning, then you're breaking up your sleep, and you probably will need an extra hour of sleep that day instead of your normal amount, just because of that. If you're sleep deprived and you're stressed, then you can be compulsive eating and stress eating. And that typically results in eating all the inflammatory foods, right, that we talked about. So, and then when you're dealing with stress, like for me, I used to love just doing more exercise in order to work out my issues. I would go for a 2-hour run to clear my head. Well, that ended up giving me physical stress to work through the mental and the emotional stress. So sometimes that will also increase the inflammation, because when you're sleep deprived or overstressed, your body will signal it with more inflammation and more pain. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to give you a couple of client success stories. So I had Ellen coming in. She was a runner. And I think she was in her mid-50s, and she tried all sorts of other things, medication, surgery for her knees, but the pain was still there. we implemented the anti-inflammatory diet, which she actually readily admitted afterwards that, you know what, I doubted that this anti-inflammatory thing would do anything. But you know what, you made it easy. It worked. I tried it. And within 3 sessions, she was actually able to run freely again. And she also had mentioned that she was able to move more freely in all the activities throughout her day without any kind of stiffness. Steve is somebody that I met on the running path. I was actually running at the time, and he was a runner, but he was cycling because he had some hip problem. So he was seeing his chiropractor. He hadn't heard of the anti-inflammatory diet. I mentioned it to him, gave him my little story about how I made all my pain go away before my hip replacement surgery, which I did just by food changes. And he came in. And we implemented the Behold program with the anti-inflammatory emphasis. And he was able to go back to running pain-free within a few weeks. And his chiropractor was actually surprised. He's like, wow, you're improving a lot faster than my other clients. How is that possible? And he's like, it's because I'm on an anti-inflammatory diet that Joanna gave me. So here's just a picture of him, of his Strava post a couple of weeks ago. He's running 9 miles on a regular basis, and this is still 2-3 years after I saw him. So the anti-inflammatory diet definitely does make a huge difference. And now you don't have to just take my word for it. Here's some clients that have said the same thing. And then here's the one that I was telling you about, the Joelle that had the thumb pain. This is her completely elevated on her hands doing yoga. So if she was having the pain in the thumbs, I mean, she was already on a wheat-free protocol. But once we implemented the next few steps for her anti-inflammatory protocol, her pain subsided pretty quickly, and we had to just work through the stiffness and that emotional issue. And now, you know, there's no limitations to what she can do. She doesn't have to say no to the activities with her kids or with her dogs. And then Keith was an older male. He was in his 60s, and he came in with hip issues and a limp, and his doctor had sent him to me for some, actually he came in initially for balancing blood sugar, but then this became an issue, and we focused on the anti-inflammatory foods. But the interesting thing with Keith is that he wasn't willing to give up wheat entirely. He wasn't willing to not go out to eat on a regular basis because his wife, he was a widow, and he wasn't a cook. So he relied on going out to eat several times a week, and I didn't take that away from him. And what we did was we minimized the amount of wheat he had in his diet. And we gave him a supplement for when he did actually eat more wheat that would counteract the inflammatory response. And he made leaps and bounds and improvements with his physical therapy, with his hip. His golf game improved. And he also had said at one time, he's like, you're not going to believe this, but my skin elasticity is better. Like my skin isn't see-through anymore. My skin is actually a better consistency. And then he was also better able to walk and walk the whole golf course and not take as many breaks on and didn't even need the cart. So it really doesn't matter what age you're at. If we can implement that anti-inflammatory diet, your whole body's just going to feel better. Any questions? So I'm just going to give you a short rundown of what my Behold program, the base program is. And basically we unravel the cause of your pain or the health issue, because we've got to find out what's really causing it. And typically stress is one of those causes. So we have to help you work through those stressors and kind of work it backwards, and implement, you know, easy steps that you can do that meet you where you are and that will fit into your schedule and fit into what you can do. But it's all about reducing that inflammation significantly with the foods first, and then expanding the safe food options so that you are not at a loss to what is it that I can eat. And then we're gonna do some of the emotional release techniques, especially if stress is part of the issue, so that you can be Zen all the time, not just once in a while. But we're going to also just improve that inflammatory response so that the body starts to heal naturally, and you can actually live your life more fully, because you are feeling like you're 20 years younger than your current self, and able to leap buildings with a single bound. And I also just create that safe space where you can be heard, acknowledged, and encouraged. So when you're having a tough time, I'm here to listen to those challenges and help you work through them, so that we can find a resolution that's easy for you, so that you can continue to make progress, just like Eileen did, Ellen, or Joelle, or Keith, or Steve, because it's just one step at a time. But if we make it easy, then it's easier for you to do. And the whole idea is to help to restore your body's natural abilities and the capabilities, so that you are healthier. We want to improve your quality of life so that you can do more every day. We want to help you move into your next adventure free of pain and your health issue, so that you can get back to the activities you love and even explore new ones. We want you to say yes to your family, your friends, your kids, or whoever it is that you want, because your pain isn't there to get in the way. I want you to be able to sleep through the night, because that's when your body is regenerating. So if we can sleep through the night, then you have more energy during the day to do more of the things that you want to do. And then I want you to know what your body needs, so that you feel best every day. And I mean every day. And once we make peace with the body and the food, you can love your life on a much greater level and find more joy and laughter in it. And I think one of the key things is, you know what, there's so many food rules out there. We're going to abandon all the food rules, because the only food rules that apply are the ones that work with your body, and the ones that allow you to eat the foods that make you feel good, and the foods that love you back. And through that, we restore that homeostasis and balance to the whole body. So all you do is get to love doing everything that you do, more creativity, more productivity, more things to do, and more fun. And who wouldn't want that? So I'm inviting you all to schedule your 15-minute call with me, so that we can go ahead and review where you are and what your situation is. We can review what you've tried and what you haven't. You've heard now a little bit about some of the things that I do with the anti-inflammatory diet and some of the stress management techniques. And then we're going to determine if we're a good fit to work together, so that we can start the Behold baseline program and help you move closer to that new adventure without the health or pain issues. So if you are ready to go ahead and schedule that call, then you can use the link that I provided in the email. I can put it in the chat too, if that would help. But it's how do I put it in the chat? That's the question. I don't know how to put it in the chat. Where's the chat part? Okay. So the link is https:// calendly.com/Joanna-NIM/15min. And we can schedule that 15-minute call anytime in the next week, 2 weeks, or you can just call me directly at 215-272-6774, and we can get you moving into your next adventure without your pain. Anybody have any questions?
No. Joanna, I did get the immersion blender. I was able to find one at Target for $30 that actually had the little food processor attachment also. You can unhook it and set it up to the food processor also.
Oh, okay, cool.
So
Yeah, I've given Tony some suggestions for making soup, and the the immersion blender is a great way to kind of puree it. So does anybody have any questions?
No, I just was going to say, Joanna, we, as part of our cooking time this past week, we did a bunch of recipes, and I actually took, had a couple of chickens, took the chickens and everything, you know, cooked them, and then, you know, took everything off the bone, took all the meat off the bone, put the bones back in, and made my own bone stock. So it really was not that hard. Just kind of kept everything low and slow, let it cook all day till like the bones were like practically dissolved and mush. And threw in like the, you know, and took all like the excess parts, like the necks and the giblets and everything, put all that into cheesecloth and let that just cook with everything else in there as well. And it actually made a really nice bone broth.
Yeah. Well, and that's the easiest way to make the bone broth. It just requires that you put it on the stove. I mean, I make it the old-fashioned way, stick it on the stove and cook it, simmer it for 9 to 12 hours.
Yeah, you just set it and forget it.
Yeah. And if you want another trick, I actually put some dried mushrooms in after I turn it off, and then I leave it on the stove overnight. And now those mushrooms add a nice extra flavor to it.
Okay, and that's what I did. I just let it cool down overnight, and just, you know, and I used whatever stock I needed in the recipes that I needed, and the rest I just froze.
Excellent. It gets a little watered down when you defrost it.
Yeah, but it still is fine.
Yeah. Excellent. So yeah, so there's always real food options for everything that we do. And I will always provide you with recipes, because you don't need to guess on what works and what doesn't. And my whole idea is we can make, I do actually a cooking class every other Tuesday. So if you're interested in that, go onto my website, www.nutritioninmotion.net, and look under classes, and you'll see the link for the Zoom call there. But cooking shouldn't take hours, and it doesn't need excessive amount of ingredients or time. So those cooking classes are really to kind of give you an idea of some of the other things that you can do, some of the new ways you can combine spices. I think this Tuesday is the Algerian chicken with a cauliflower medley. So it's really tasty, and we'll have it all cooked within 45 minutes, typically, definitely under an hour. So whenever I give you recipes to take home or try at home, it's always been something that I have tried, that I have altered. I've added the anti-inflammatory things, and I've also made it so that you can make it in 30 to 45 minutes, because you should not be slaving in the kitchen forever. And it should be easy, and it should taste good. And that's why I try it, and then I share it with you. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and set up that 15-minute chat with me. And I am going to thank you again for coming and attending. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me, Joanna Hydroska at nutritioninmotion.net. And we can help you get through your pain issue or your pain challenge, so that you can get moving into your new adventure. So have a great evening.
Joanna, I'm gonna go. That way I can get rested for surgery tomorrow, and I'll let you know how I make out.
Yes, please do.
All
Good
right.
luck. Send me
Thanks,
prayers and blessings. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night, everyone.